My name is Brooke Harland, and at 33, I spent every last dollar I had on a gas station my whole family called a grave. The day I signed the papers, my mother told me to my face that I was a fool, and my father just looked at the wall. My brother Wade laughed and said I was a hopeless failure. They were gone before the ink was dry. 1 week later, I stood in the dark behind that old convenience store, staring at a steel door somebody had plastered over on purpose. What I found behind that wall 1 week later didn't just change my life. It rewrote the one story my family had spent 40 years telling about itself. And the day I finally said it out loud, at my father's own gala, the whole room went quiet. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, the channel where ordinary women set hard boundaries, keep their dignity, and let the truth do the talking. If a quiet comeback is your kind of story, you're in the right place. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe so the next one finds you. The title company in Millbrook, Colorado, has one conference room, and that morning my whole family came to fill it. I don't know how they found out about the closing. Probably Dale. My father, Garrett Harland, walked in like he was inspecting a job site. My mother, Lorraine, sat across from me with her purse in her lap, like she might need to leave fast. I had a cashier's check for the full amount in front of me, $41,000. Every cent I had saved in 11 years. The escrow officer slid the deed across the table, and my mother said, quiet and clear, "You're throwing your life in a ditch." I uncapped the pen. My father didn't sit. He stood by the window with his back to me and said, "Real Harlands build something. They don't go digging through other people's trash." It landed exactly where he aimed it. Wade leaned against the door frame, arms crossed, grinning like this was the best show in town. "You know what you are, Brooke?" he said. "You're a hopeless failure." I signed my name. The pen didn't shake, which surprised me more than anything they had said. The escrow officer cleared her throat and asked if I wanted a copy of the recorded deed, mailed or emailed. "Both," I said. My family filed out. My father never turned around. Through the window, I watched his truck pull out of the lot, Wade's behind it, and then my mother's sedan, 3 sets of tail lights going back toward town, and the life that had no room in it for me. I sat alone with a deed to a dead gas station 10 minutes up Route 9, and a bank account that now read $84.16. There was no version of this where I got my money back. I had already won the only argument that mattered and lost everyone in the room. People in town thought I was the Harland who couldn't hold anything together. The truth was duller and worse. For 6 years, I kept the books for Harlan Land and Holdings, my father's company, and I was good at it. Then there was a land deal in 2019, a strip parcel off the county road, and the numbers Wade wanted me to record didn't match the numbers that actually moved. I flagged it twice in writing. He told me to leave it alone, that I didn't understand how deals breathed. When the county came asking questions, the paperwork had my initials on the entries, and Wade's fingerprints nowhere. My father chose to believe his son. I didn't fight it the way I should have, because fighting your own family in public felt like setting fire to your own house. So I left. I hung my own shingle, Harlan Bookkeeping, a one-woman shop, in a rented suite on 2nd Street. For 2 years, I did honest work for honest people, and it almost held. Then my biggest client, a contractor who owed me 8 months of fees, filed bankruptcy and took my margins with him. I closed the suite in March. I am the kind of person who reads the fine print twice and still apologizes for taking up the room. Over-responsible, my old boss called it back when I had a boss. I carry other people's mistakes like rent I owe. That's the weakness nobody in my family ever noticed because it always worked in their favor. So when Dale Mercer told me about a property nobody wanted, cheap enough that a woman with $84 and a ruined name could own it free and clear, I listened. I should have asked why he was so eager to help. I did ask. The answer just took me a while to find. Dale flips properties in Millbrook. He buys dead things cheap, paints over the rot, and sells them to people who don't look underneath. He'd done a little work for my father over the years, which should have been my first warning. He found me at the diner on Route 9, slid into the booth, and said he had something perfect for me. The old Howran station, 10 minutes out on the old highway, shut down since 1987. Asking price, $41,000. Land alone is worth more, he said. Owners are an estate back east. They just want it gone. It sounded too clean, and I knew it, so I did what I do. I pulled the title myself at the county recorder's office and read every transfer back to the 1930s. Clear, no liens. I called the state about the underground tanks because abandoned stations are environmental nightmares, and the file showed the tanks had been pulled and certified clean in 1991. I walked the parcel twice. I paid $200 I didn't have for a quick structural look from a retired inspector named Pete, who said the bones were good and the roof was a liability. Everything checked. The price was low, but the place was an eyesore on a road nobody drove anymore, and the seller was a tired estate. That math closed. I bought it because it was the only door my $84 could open, and because for once I wanted to own something that was mine before anyone could put their name on it. What I didn't check was Dale's face when I told him I was paying cash and skipping the inspection contingency he'd suggested. He smiled too wide and said, "Smart girl." Then he stepped outside the diner and made a phone call I couldn't hear. You have to understand what the name Harlan means in Millbrook. My grandfather, Amos Harland, came here with nothing in the 30s and ended up owning half the storefronts on Main Street. My father took that and built Harlan Land and holdings into the company that put up every subdivision, strip center, and frontage road in the county for 30 years. There is a Harlan wing at the hospital. There is a Harlan scholarship at the high school. When people in this town said the name, they said it the way you'd say a landmark. And that fall, the Chamber of Commerce was set to name my father's Citizen of the Year at the Founders Day Gala, the biggest night Millbrook throws. 200 people, the mayor, the paper. My father had been the unofficial king of this town my whole life, and now they were going to crown him in front of everyone. I grew up understanding that the name was a roof we all lived under, and that roof had rules. You did not embarrass it. You did not strike out on your own and make people whisper. And you absolutely did not buy the ugliest building on Route 9 with your last dollar, the same season your father was being honored. My mother said I'd done it on purpose to humiliate them. I hadn't. I'd done it because it was the only thing I could afford, and the only thing that could be wholly, legally mine. But I knew the gala was coming. I just had no idea yet that the same stage would be where everything finally broke open. The first night I owned the place, I went out alone with a flashlight and a thermos of coffee. The Howran station sat low against the dark, 2 dead pumps out front, and a convenience store tacked onto the side, the windows gone milky with dust. I let myself in with the key the escrow officer had handed me in a yellow envelope. The smell hit me first. Old diesel soaked into concrete, and under it something chalky and damp, like wet lime and plaster left to cure in the dark for 40 years. It wasn't a bad smell exactly. It was the smell of something sealed up and waiting. I walked the front room, the empty coolers, the cash counter with its rusted register still bolted down. Behind the convenience store, there was a storage room, maybe 12 by 20, lined with collapsed metal shelving and a back wall that had been finished in cheap paneling sometime in the 80s. I ran my hand along it. Then, because I'm the kind of person who can't leave a wrong number alone, I knocked. The front and side walls knocked back solid. The back wall sounded wrong, hollow, but not the hollow of an empty stud bay, deeper. There was a cool draft coming from a seam where the paneling met the floor, steady, like the building was breathing out. I stood there a long time with my hand flat against that cheap paneling. $84 to my name and the whole town laughing at me, listening to a wall exhale. I told myself it was probably a crawl space, a pipe chase, nothing. But I went home that night and couldn't sleep because the back wall of my dead gas station sounded like it was hiding something on purpose. My mother called the next morning before I'd finished my coffee. She doesn't open with hello. Your father didn't sleep, she said. Do you know what people are saying? I said I had a fair guess. She told me Pastor Reed had asked after me at the prayer breakfast, in that voice people use when they mean, is she all right in the head? She told me the Hendersons had seen my car out at the Howren place. She told me I was making my father a punchline in his own town the season they were honoring him. Come to the gala, she said. Stand with the family. Let people see we're together, and quietly let that property go. I said I wasn't going to let it go. There was a silence, and then she said, the thing she always says, the thing that used to work. Family closes ranks, Brooke. You chose the door. I'd heard that line my whole life, usually right before I gave in. This time I just held the phone and looked out my apartment window at the hills going gold in the morning sun. I love you, Mom, I said. I'm keeping the station. And I hung up before she could find the next handle to grab me by. If you've ever had your own family tell you exactly what you'll never become, you already know how that voice follows you into a quiet room at night. Stay with me, because the wall I was about to open didn't just hold a secret. It held the proof. If this is hitting close to home, hit subscribe and ride this one out with me. I drove back out to Route 9 that afternoon with a crowbar in the back seat, and I was done waiting on that wall. I made myself a plan first on a legal pad at the counter, because a plan is the only thing that ever calms me down. Roof, then windows, then power. I had no money, so the plan was mostly sweat and patience, and whatever I could trade for. I figured I could open a small repair shop or a snack stop for the few trucks that still took the old highway, just enough to keep the lights on while I decided what the place could really be. If it failed, I had nothing. Not savings, not a fallback, not a family door to knock on. That was the deal I'd signed. So I worked. I hauled out the dead shelving and swept 4 decades of grit. The smell of diesel and damp lime came up off the floor again, stronger now that I disturbed it, riding on the dust. By late afternoon, I stood in front of the 80s paneling with my crowbar. The first sheet came away with a shriek of old nails, and a breath of cold air rolled out over my feet. Behind the cheap paneling, there was no crawl space. There was a wall of poured concrete, smooth and deliberate, and set into it a steel door. Not a closet door, a heavy slab of riveted steel with a rotary bolt handle, the kind you'd see on an old bank vault, sealed shut and painted over, and then walled in by somebody who wanted it forgotten. Someone had hidden this on purpose, twice. Once behind concrete, then again behind paneling. I stood there holding the crowbar with my heart going hard, and I knew 2 things at once. This was bigger than a gas station, and I was the only person on earth who knew it was here. I didn't pry it open that night, and I want you to know why, because it tells you everything about how this ended. My whole life, my family treated me like the girl who couldn't see the big picture, so I make myself slow down. I photographed the door from every angle. I wrote down the date, the time, the condition of the seal. I measured it. Then I went home and started reading, because the only thing I trust more than a plan is a record. The Howren station, it turned out, wasn't built as a station. The parcel showed up in the county history as a bonded warehouse put up in the early 1920s by a man named A.N. Howeren. Bonded meant the federal government licensed it to store goods under seal, taxes paid on the way out. During Prohibition, a bonded warehouse was one of the few legal places liquor could exist. Medicinal permits, government stock, distillery holdings frozen by the law. The building became a gas station in 1936 after the Howerens were gone. And somewhere in that conversion, someone had bricked up the old bonded room and built a convenience store over the memory of it. I sat at my kitchen table at 2 a.m. with printouts spread everywhere and felt the shape of it land on me. There was a sealed room behind my storage wall that had been built to hold things under federal seal, and it had been hidden deliberately for 90 years. I went back out the next day and worked the painted bolt loose with penetrating oil and patience, an inch at a time, until the handle finally turned with a groan that echoed down into something below. The door swung in 2 inches and stopped. Beyond it, I could see the top of a stone stairway going down into a black that smelled faintly of oak. I went down 12 stone steps with my flashlight in one hand and my phone recording in the other, because I wanted a record of the first moment, untouched. The smell I had been chasing since the first night opened up around me at the bottom. Diesel and damp lime, still, but layered over with something older and sweeter, charred oak and slow rotting paper, the smell of things that had been aging in the dark longer than I had been alive. The cellar was bigger than the storage room above it. Stone walls, a vaulted brick ceiling, and racks, wooden racks running the length of the room, and on them, in the beam of my light, rows of dark glass. Bottles, hundreds of them, wrapped in straw and brittle paper, packed in crates, stamped with faded ink. I lifted one carefully out of its nest of straw and turned it in the light. The glass was hand-blown, heavy, sealed with wax over the cork, and the label, though spotted, was legible. A bonded whiskey, the strip stamp still across the cap, a date in the corner that started with 19 and a 2. My hands were not steady anymore. I have read enough to know what a single bottle of authenticated, bonded, pre-repeal whiskey can bring at auction. $1,000 is the low end. The famous bottles bring far more. And I was standing in a stone room with rack after rack of them, 90 years sealed, the wax intact. I did not whoop. I did not call anyone. I stood very still in that cold cellar and did the only thing my brain knows how to do under pressure. I started counting crates, then bottles per crate, then the math, and the number it gave me was so large that I made myself sit down on the bottom step in the dark and breathe before I let myself believe it. Here's the thing my family never understood about me. The bottles weren't the win. The win was provenance. Anybody can find old liquor in a wall and half of it gets seized, smashed, or sold for nothing because nobody can prove what it is or where it came from. The difference between a curiosity and a fortune is paper. Who made it? Who bonded it? Who owned it? An unbroken chain from then to the bottle in your hand. So instead of telling a soul, I spent the next 2 days being a bookkeeper. I photographed every crate, every stamp, every label, and logged them in a spreadsheet like inventory. I did not move anything more than I had to. I found a fine spirits auction house in Denver that handled exactly this kind of thing, and I emailed them, careful and plain, as the verified legal owner of the property, asking what authentication would require. They emailed back within an hour. They were very, very interested. They wanted dates, they wanted photos, and above all, they wanted any original documentation tying the cash to the bonded warehouse. Because that, the appraiser wrote, was the difference between a good sale and a historic one. Documentation, of course. I went back down into the cellar with new eyes, not looking at the bottles now, but at the room itself. The corners, the old desk shoved against the far wall. A bonded warehouse runs on records. If A.N. Howard sealed this room, he sealed his paperwork with it. I just had to find where. Dale Mercer showed up the third day, unannounced, the way a man does when he's been told something. He came in the front while I was hauling a tarp out to my car, and his eyes went straight to the storage room, the open paneling, the dark mouth of the steel door I hadn't gotten around to hiding. "What you got back there?" he said, too casual. I'd grown up in a family of practiced liars, so I know exactly what a man sounds like when he already knows the answer and wants to watch you decide whether to tell the truth. I said it was an old utility room full of mold, condemned. He nodded slow, but he was already walking toward it, and I had to step into his path with the tarp and a smile and steer him back toward the front. "Place is a hazard, Dale," I said. "Insurance won't even cover a tour." He laughed, but his eyes stayed on that doorway the whole time. "You did good getting this cheap," he said. "Real good. Almost too good, huh?" Then he left, and I watched through the milky window as he sat in his truck in my gravel lot for a full minute, not driving, just talking into his phone with one hand cutting the air the way men do when they're explaining something that's gone off plan. I memorized that. Dale, who found me the deal. Dale, who'd worked for my father. And Dale, who knew the old stories about this place, because everybody our age had heard them growing up. That the Howrens had run a bonded warehouse here before. The war. That there had once been liquor under federal seal. Folks always said Amos had cleaned it out back in 33 and left nothing behind but rumor. But a man who knew that history would look at a sealed steel vault door the way Dale just had and understand in a heartbeat that the rumor might not be empty after all. Dale, sitting in my lot calling someone the second he smelled, there was more here than dirt. I went back inside, and for the first time locked the steel door from the inside and dropped a sheet of plywood over the paneling gap. I had no proof of anything yet, but I had stopped believing this property had fallen into my lap by luck. My parents came to the station 2 days later, which tells you everything, because in 3 weeks of owning it, they had never once driven out to see what their daughter had bought. My father got out of his truck and looked the place over with a different face than the one he'd worn at the closing. Not contempt now, calculation. My mother brought a casserole, which is what my mother brings when she wants something. "We've been worried about you out here all alone," she said, holding the dish like a peace offering. My father walked the lot, studying the building, the old highway, the way the light fell on it. "Good frontage," he said, mostly to himself. "Always was." Then gently, like it was nothing, he got to it. "Brooke, a property like this, there are tax angles, liability angles. It's a lot for one person. We could fold it into holdings, keep it in the family, protect you on the paperwork. Protect me." I almost laughed. 3 weeks ago, I was a hopeless failure digging through trash, and now my father wanted to protect me with a quitclaim deed. I asked him plainly where they'd heard the place was worth protecting. My mother's eyes flicked to my father's just for a second, and I had my answer. Dale had called somebody, and the somebody was standing in my gravel lot offering me a casserole and a deed. "I'm fine on the paperwork," I said. "It's the one thing I've always been good at." My father's jaw worked. He didn't push. Not yet. They left the casserole and drove back toward town, and I stood in my own lot and understood that the laughing was over. The Harlans had decided the gas station was worth having, which meant they had decided it was worth taking. I found it the next night, and it changed the shape of everything. The old desk against the far cellar wall was bolted to the floor, and behind it, set into the stone at knee height, was a small iron door I'd missed in the dark, no bigger than an oven. It took an hour of working the hinge before it gave. Inside sat a brass-cornered strong box, green with age, heavy as a sleeping cat. I carried it up to the counter and worked the latch, and it opened with a sigh of cold air and the smell of old paper that had been kept dry. Inside were A.N. Howren's records, a bonded manifest from the distillery listing the cases by lot and proof, stamped and dated 1924, a federal bond permit for the warehouse, and underneath those, folded in oilskin, the two papers that mattered more than all the rest, a promissory note from 1931 and a bill of sale dated March of that same year. The deed for this very parcel with A.N. Howren's signature on the seller's line. I read the buyer's name 3 times before it would hold still. Amos Harland, my grandfather, the man with nothing who came to Millbrook and ended up owning half of Main Street. He hadn't bought it. Stapled behind them was a county foreclosure notice from 1933. And the papers together told a story even my tired eyes could read. The note was in Amos Harland's own hand. He had loaned Howren money against the warehouse in the worst year of the Depression, at a rate most people today would call predatory, the full balance due in 90 days. The bill of sale and the foreclosure showed the rest. When Howren couldn't pay, Amos took the land, the building, and everything in it for the price of the debt, everything in it. Except Amos never found the seller, because the bonded room was already sealed when he took the keys. And a man in a hurry to look respectable doesn't go knocking on his own walls. I sat at the counter holding 90 years of my family's first lie, the fortune my father built his pride on. The name this whole town worshipped started right here, in the room my father had stood in 3 weeks ago and called other people's trash. A different woman might have driven straight to my father's house and thrown that bill of sale on his kitchen table. I wanted to. I sat in my car outside the station for 20 minutes wanting to, but I have learned the hard way that the satisfying thing and the smart thing are almost never the same thing, and that my family wins every fight that happens, out loud and in the dark, so I did it by the book. The next morning, I scanned every page, front and back, and saved copies in 3 places. I drove the originals to a bank 2 towns over, where no Harland had ever set foot, and locked them in a safe deposit box in my name. I sent the bonded manifest and the 1924 permit to the Denver appraiser, who wrote back that the documentation was, his word, extraordinary, and that it would authenticate the entire cash beyond dispute. And I drove to the county recorder's office and pulled my own deed again, and the chain of title behind it, and confirmed the only fact that would matter when the shouting started. I own this parcel free and clear, bought with my own money, recorded in my own name, with no lien, no cosigner, and no Harland anywhere near the line. The 1931 bill of sale didn't change my ownership 1 inch. What it changed was whose story this was. I made a folder, the kind I used to make for audits, tabbed and ordered. Deed, title chain, manifest, permit, appraisal, bill of sale. I didn't need to win an argument with my father. I needed clean paper. And for the first time in my life, in the one thing I had always been good at and always been punished for, I was holding more of it than he was. Wade came next, because my father never throws the first punch himself. He sends. My brother walked into the station in his good boots and his company jacket and looked around like he was pricing it. "Heard you've been busy," he said. He didn't bother with a casserole. He got right to the offer, dressed up as concerned. Holdings would buy the property at a fair number, take the headache off my hands, keep it all in the family where it belonged. When I said no, The concern dropped away, like a coat he was tired of carrying. "You don't get it," he said. "That land's got history with this family. Granddad's history. You go selling off whatever you dug up out of Harlan ground. That's not just yours, Brooke. There's a moral question there. People would see it that way. A moral question." I almost admired it. I asked him what history exactly he meant. And Wade, who has never in his life been able to resist showing me he knows more than I do, said, "You think I don't know about Old Man Howren? Dad told me the whole story years ago. Granddad got that place fair and square in 33. Fair and square. He said it so smoothly that I knew he had no idea I was holding the foreclosure notice that proved otherwise. But the slip was made, and I filed it away with the rest. They knew. The Harlans had always known how the name started. They had just decided 2 generations ago that a story repeated often enough becomes the truth. Wade left, telling me I had until Founders Day to be reasonable. I didn't ask what Founders Day had to do with it. I already had a cold feeling I knew. My father came alone the next evening, which he had never done in my life. He found me sweeping the front room at dusk and stood in the doorway a long moment, an old man against the orange sky. And for once, he didn't lead with a verdict. "I used to drive past here when I was a boy," he said. "Your grandfather brought me. He'd sit in the truck and just look at it." He came in and ran a hand along the dusty counter, and something in his face was almost soft. 40 years I built this town," he said. "Every road out there, half the houses. And you know what they'll remember in 20 years? Nothing. Names go quiet. They put your plaque up, and then they forget your face." For a second I saw it, the fear under all of it. A man terrified of being a stranger in the town he made. I felt something open in my chest toward him, and then he closed it himself. "That's why family has to hold," he said. "The softness gone, the grip back. Whatever you found, it's a Harlan thing. Now you'll do the right thing at the gala. You'll stand up and say the family's handling it together. This town remembers who built it, Brooke. Don't make them remember the wrong name." There it was, not a father, a man defending a monument with his daughter for a sandbag. "And if I don't?" I asked. He looked at me with something that wasn't quite a threat and wasn't quite a plea. "Then you'll find out how short a Harlan's memory of you can be," he said. And he walked out into the dark. I stood there with the broom and understood the gala wasn't an invitation. It was an ambush, and I was meant to be the surprise. The appraisal came back on a Tuesday in an email I read 4 times standing in my kitchen. The Denver house had reviewed my photos, my inventory, the manifest, and the bond permit, and they had sent a specialist out to the station under a signed confidentiality agreement to examine the seller in person. He spent 6 hours down there and came up pale and grinning. The cash was real, the wax seals unbroken, the contents consistent with the 1924 manifest, down to the lot numbers, authenticated, bonded, pre-repeal stock, with a documented chain of custody from the distillery to the warehouse to me. That last part, the chain, was the gold. Their conservative estimate for the collection at auction, the email said, was north of $1 million, with the historically significant bottles likely to draw well past that. I set the phone down on the counter very carefully, like it might break, and I sat down on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets and let myself feel it for exactly 5 minutes. $1 million. Me, the hopeless failure with $84 and a ruined name, sitting on a fortune in a building my father called a grave. Then the 5 minutes were up, and I got off the floor, because a number like that doesn't make you safe. It makes you a target. I'd seen what my family did over a strip parcel worth $40,000. I knew exactly what they'd do over this. The appraisal wasn't the finish line. It was the starting gun. And the only thing standing between me and the people who'd spent my whole life teaching me I was nothing was a folder full of paper and a stubbornness I'd inherited. Fairly this time, from the same blood that was about to come for me. I went looking for why Dale Mercer had handed me a fortune for $41,000, and the answer wasn't hard to find once I knew to look. I called the estate back east that had sold me the station, the tired heirs Dale had told me about. The woman who answered was a granddaughter, polite and confused. They'd listed the property a year ago, she said, at $65,000, and gotten no interest at all until a local fixer reached out and offered to take it off their hands as a courtesy for $41,000 to a buyer he had lined up who'd fix the eyesore. They'd been grateful. I thanked her and hung up and sat with it. Dale hadn't found me a deal. Dale had found a cheap property and a desperate Harlan to park it on. He'd talked me out of the inspection contingency so I couldn't back out. He'd expected me to fail, to run out of money in a month, and then he'd planned to scoop the parcel back at a distressed price, the way he always does. And the buyer he'd had lined up, the somebody he called from my gravel lot, the somebody who suddenly wanted to fold a worthless gas station into the family. There was only one developer in this county who wanted that frontage. I'd grown up at his dinner table. Dale and Wade had been talking, maybe the whole time. They'd set me up to fail on Harlan land, so a Harlan could buy it back clean. The only thing none of them had counted on was that the failure would dig. When Dale called that week to feel me out about selling, I let him finish his whole friendly pitch. Then I said, "You bet on me failing, Dale. That was your first mistake." And I hung up. I had a choice to make, and it wasn't the obvious one. I could sell the cash, take my $1,000,000, and disappear. And a part of me wanted exactly that, to vanish somewhere green and never hear the name Harlan again. But that would have left them the land and the story and the satisfaction of watching me run. So I made a different plan, the kind I'm good at, on a legal pad at midnight. I would auction the collection through Denver, clean and public and documented, so no one could ever call it dug-up family property. And I would keep the station, not as a snack stop now, as something real. I'd been talking quietly with a developer named Sutter out of the next county who had wanted into Millbrook for years and had been blocked at every turn by Harlan land and holdings. He'd seen the bones of what the old highway could be, a restored station, a roadhouse, a stop worth driving for. My father's oldest rival standing on the parcel my father craved. There was a kind of justice in that I didn't have to manufacture. For 2 weeks, I did nothing my family could see and everything that mattered. I signed the auction consignment with Denver, a real contract with a real date, the collection legally committed to public sale in my name. I signed a letter of intent with Sutter to redevelop the station, with my ownership stated plainly on the first page. I had a lawyer 2 towns over, not anyone the Harlans had ever bought a lunch for, review my title and confirm in writing what I already knew, that the property and its contents were mine alone, free of any claim. My family was fighting the only way they knew, with whispers and pressure and the soft suggestion that I owed them. My father spread it around town that his troubled daughter had stumbled onto something, and the family was helping her manage it. Wade hinted to anyone who'd listen that there were questions about how I'd come to own Harlan ground. They had a story, polished and warm, the kind people in Millbrook wanted to believe. They were good at stories. They'd built a whole name out of one, but a story is just a story until it meets a signature. And I had the signatures. Every time the pressure tightened, I added another tab to the folder. Deed, title opinion, consignment, letter of intent, bill of sale. While they talked, I built a wall of paper so clean and so dull that no amount of charm could climb it. That's the difference between how my family fights and how I do. They reach for the room, I reach for the record, and the record was finally completely on my side. The pressure went public the second week of October. At the grocery, Mrs. Henderson, who'd known me since Sunday school, gave me a tight little smile and said she hoped I'd do right by my poor father after all he'd done for this town. At the gas pump, a man I didn't know called me the Harlan girl who was airing dirty laundry. Someone wrote a letter to the paper about ingratitude in the younger generation. Unsigned, but I knew the cadence. My mother's cadence. My father had turned the town into a chorus, and the song was that I was a confused, grasping girl tearing at a great man during his finest season. I drove out to the EY, Station 1, gray afternoon, just to stand in a place that was mine. I walked into the half-gutted store with the new windows in and the roof patched, and the smell came up to meet me. Diesel and lime still, but I understood it differently now. It wasn't the smell of trash, the way my father had named it. It wasn't the smell of something dying. It was the smell of a foundation, the literal ground the Harlan name was poured on, hidden under paneling for 90 years so nobody had to look at it. My grandfather had stood on this exact floor and chosen the lie. My father had repeated it until it felt like granite. And here I was, the family failure, sweeping it clean. Founders Day was 4 days out. They thought they were walking me into a trap. I let them keep thinking it. The invitation came formal on heavy paper, which is how I knew it was a performance. My mother dropped it at my apartment herself. Mr. and Mrs. Garrett Harlan request the honor of their daughter's presence at the Founders Day Gala in celebration of Garrett Harlan, Citizen of the Year. Your father wants you on stage with the family, my mother said, standing in my doorway like she wouldn't risk coming in. He's going to speak about new beginnings, about the family coming together around the old station. It'll mean everything to him to have you there, doing the right thing in front of everyone. I asked her what the right thing was. Exactly. She smoothed her coat and said, letting the family handle the property, saying so kindly where people can hear, putting this whole ugly business to rest. So that was the script. My father would stand on the Founders Day stage, accept his crown, and announce that the famous find on the old Howren place was coming home to Harlan Holdings with his daughter's blessing. The prodigal returning to the fold on the biggest night of his life. And I, ambushed in front of 200 people in the press, would have no graceful way to say no without looking exactly like the grasping, confused girl they'd spent a month describing. It was a good trap. I'll give them that. My mother also let slip, because she can never resist a detail that flatters, that my father had given the paper an early word that there would be a real story in Sunday's edition about the Harlans and their historic discovery. The press would be there. Good, I thought, and I didn't let it show on my face. I said I'd come. My mother looked relieved and a little surprised, and drove away, thinking it was over. I went inside and packed the folder. The night before the gala, I didn't write a speech. I want you to understand that, because it's the whole point. My family's power was always noise. The loud table, the room full of allies, the story told first and loudest. If I walked in there to outshout them, I'd lose the way I'd always lost, because that was their game on their court. So I didn't prepare words. I prepared an envelope, a clean manila envelope, and inside it, copies, only copies, of the documents that mattered. My recorded deed with the county stamp, the auction consignment in my name, the lawyer's title opinion, and the 1931 bill of sale stapled to the 1933 foreclosure, Amos Harlan's signature, where everyone could see it. I laid each page out on my kitchen table and checked it one last time, the way I used to check a ledger before an audit, because a single wrong figure is all it takes for them to call you a liar. Everything was in order. I set my dress out, the dark blue one, nothing flashy. I went to bed early and, to my own surprise, slept. I wasn't going to raise my voice at that gala. I'd spent 33 years raising my voice in that family and being told it was shrill. So I was going to do the one thing they never saw coming from the daughter who couldn't see the big picture. I was going to stay perfectly, completely calm, and let the paper speak in a room too polite to interrupt it. Let my father shout. Let Wade turn red. The louder they got, the truer I'd look. I zipped the envelope into my bag and turned off the light. Tomorrow, my father would hand me a microphone in front of the whole town, expecting me to surrender. I planned to thank him for it. The Founders' Day Gala filled the old Elks Hall on Main Street, 200 chairs, and a low stage strung with white lights. The long tables dressed in linen the chamber only brings out once a year. The mayor was there, the county commissioners. The publisher of the Millbrook Sentinel sat near the front with a photographer, and I noticed, 3 tables back, a man in a quiet gray suit I didn't recognize, with a leather folio and the still, watchful patience of someone there to confirm a thing rather than celebrate it. The auction house had sent a representative, as I'd asked them to in writing. I wore the dark blue dress and carried a small bag, and I let my mother seat me at the family table near the front where everyone could see the Harlans reunited. My father worked the room like the king he'd always been. A hand on every shoulder, a name for every face. Wade stood at his elbow in a new suit. My mother glowed. To anyone watching, we were exactly the family the name promised. Under the table, my hands were folded over the bag in my lap. There was a dinner I didn't taste and toasts I didn't hear. And then the chamber president stood and began the speech about my father, the boy with nothing who built a town, the Harlan legacy, 4 decades of vision. The crowd applauded in all the right places. My father sat with the gracious half smile of a man who has heard his own praise so often it's become weather. When they called his name and handed him the plaque, 200 people rose to their feet. I rose with them, calm as still water, the smell of diesel and lime nowhere near that bright, warm room, and yet somehow with me anyway, the foundation under everything. And I waited for him to do exactly what I knew he was going to do. My father held the plaque and let the applause run long before he raised a hand to quiet it. He thanked the chamber, the mayor, the town. He told the story of Amos arriving with nothing, of building something from dust. The room ate it the way they always had. Then he turned, and his eyes found me at the family table, and his voice warmed into the part of the speech they'd written for me. "This town knows my family's had a hard season," he said. "My daughter Brooke took a chance on the old Howard place. A lot of folks thought she was foolish." A soft, knowing laugh moved through the hall. "But the Harlans don't quit on each other, and what she found out there belongs to all of us, to this town's history. So tonight, I'm proud to say that the discovery on the old station is coming home where it belongs, into the family with my daughter's blessing." He let that land. The applause started to build, and then he did the thing he'd planned all along, the move that was meant to seal me into the story in front of everyone. He held out his hand toward me and said, "Brooke, honey, come on up here and say a few words." 200 faces turned. The photographer lifted his camera. My mother beamed at me with her whole heart, certain I'd been broken into shape at last. Wade watched with the flat, careful eyes of a man waiting to see his bet pay off. I stood, I walked up the 3 steps to the stage in my dark blue dress, calm as I'd promised myself I'd be, and my father handed me the microphone with the smile of a man who has already won. I took it. I thanked him, which surprised him. Then I reached into my bag for the envelope. "Thank you, Dad," I said into the microphone, and my voice came out steady and warm, which I think unsettled him more than shouting would have. "I want to tell all of you the truth about the old station, because it's a better story than the one you've heard." I opened the envelope. First, the simple part. I bought the Howren property myself, with my own savings, free and clear. It's recorded at the county under my name only. No co-signers, no family money. I held up the stamped deed page so the front tables could see it and set it on the podium. Second, what I found in a sealed room behind the store is a collection of bonded whiskey from the 1920s. Authenticated, fully documented. It's going to public auction in Denver next month under a contract I've already signed. Another page on the podium. The room had gone very quiet. The good kind of quiet, the kind where people lean in. My father's smile was still up, but it had stopped meaning anything. And third, I said, the part that's actually about this family. I unfolded the last pages. When I was looking for the paperwork to prove where that whiskey came from, I found the original records, a promissory note and a bill of sale dated March of 1931, signed by A.N. Howren, who built that warehouse, and stapled behind them a county foreclosure notice from 1933. I looked at my father then, not cruelly, just plainly, the way you look at someone you finally stop being afraid of. My grandfather didn't buy the Howren place, Dad. I have his note in his own hand. He loaned a drowning man money in the Depression at terms that would shock anyone in this room. The full balance, due in 90 days. And when Howren couldn't pay, he took the land, the building, and everything in it for the price of the debt. That's where the Harlan name started. Right there in the room you stood in 3 weeks ago and called other people's trash. My father's face came apart in front of the whole town. "That's a lie," he said, too loud, lunging half a step toward me. "Put that down, Brooke. Put it down." Wade was on his feet at the family table, red to his collar, saying my name like a warning. My mother had a hand pressed to her mouth, and I just stood there, calm as still water, and let them be the loud ones for once. "It's not a lie," I said quietly. "The foreclosure and the transfer are recorded at this county's own courthouse, back in 1933. Any of you can pull them Monday morning and read them for yourselves. And the note and the bill of sale, in Granddad's own hand, are notarized originals. I'm holding the copies right here." I looked to the back of the room, and the gentleman in the gray suit 3 tables back is from the auction house. He can tell you the collection is exactly what I say it is. 200 people sat in dead silence. Not one of them was laughing. My father reached for the documents on the podium. I slid them an inch out of his reach, gently, without breaking his eyes. "Those are copies," I said. "The originals are in a safe deposit box you can't get to." The man in the gray suit had stood, and in the silence, his voice carried easily. "I can confirm the consignment is signed and the provenance is documented. The sale will proceed as scheduled under Ms. Harlan's name." The publisher of the Sentinel was writing fast. The photographer's camera clicked twice, and I knew without being told that whatever ran in Sunday's paper would not be the story my father had ordered. Wade pushed through to the front of the stage, and his voice cracked when he found it. "You think this is over? We'll have lawyers on this by Monday. There are claims. There's family interest. There's nothing," I said, and I didn't raise my voice an inch. "I bought it. I own it." I let it sit. Everything I have, I can show on paper, every dollar, every signature, every date. Can you? My brother opened his mouth and shut it, because he and I both knew exactly what his paper looked like, going back to a strip parcel in 2019 with my initials on a lie. He had nothing to put on a podium. For the first time in our lives, the silence was on his side of the table. My mother had sat back down, slowly, her hand still at her mouth, looking at my father like she was seeing the foundation of her own life for the first time. And my father just stood there in front of the town he had built, holding a Citizen of the Year plaque in one hand and grasping at copies he couldn't keep with the other. I didn't gloat. I want you to know that, because the wanting to was right there, hot in my throat, 33 years of it. But I had learned what my family never did, that the loud win isn't the real one. So I set the microphone back in its stand. I gathered my copies into a neat stack and slid them into the envelope, unhurried, the way I'd close a ledger. "Congratulations on the award, Dad," I said, and I meant it as plainly as it sounded. "You did build a lot. That part's true." Then I walked down the 3 steps, past the family table, past my mother's stunned face and my brother's red one, past 200 people who had come to crown the Harlan name and were now learning what it was poured on. Nobody clapped. Nobody booed. They just watched me go, and the quiet followed me all the way to the doors. Outside, the night was cold and clean, and I stood in the parking lot a moment and breathed. And there it was again, faint, carried on my own coat from a week of work. Diesel and damp lime, the smell of the cellar, the smell of the foundation. Only now it didn't smell like my father's contempt or my family's secret. It smelled like ground I dug up honestly and planted my own name in. I got in my car and drove out Route 9 to the station, my station, and sat in the gravel lot with the engine ticking, looking at the patched roof and the new windows catching the moonlight. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a Harland who had failed. I felt like a woman who owned exactly what she stood on. The auction in Denver brought $1.3 million, and the historically significant lots, the ones tied to the bonded manifest, drew bidders from 3 countries. The Sentinel ran the real story that Sunday, the discovery, the documentation, and the 1931 bill of sale. And after that, the town's whispering changed its direction, the way a wind does. Dale Mercer's name stopped showing up on listings. People don't hand their property to a man who'd set up a neighbor's daughter to fail. Wade's lawyers never called because there was nothing for them to hold. And quietly around town, the questions people used to ask about me started getting asked about him instead. My father kept the plaque. He did not apologize, and I didn't wait for one, because I'd stopped needing the apology somewhere around the moment I stopped being afraid of him. The station opened the following spring, restored with Sutter's partnership. The old pumps kept for show. The bonded cellar preserved behind glass, with a plaque of its own that told the true history, Howard's name first. People drive the old highway again, now just to see it. The building everyone called a grave turned out to be the most honest ground in Millbrook. And I bought it for $41,000, and my whole family's good opinion, which it turned out was the cheapest part of the deal. I kept the books for the new place myself, tabbed, ordered, every figure where it belonged. The one thing I was always good at, finally working for me. My mother came to the station once after it opened, alone. She walked through the bright, restored rooms and stood a long time at the glass, over the cellar, reading Howard's name. Then she found me and said the family missed me, that it wasn't too late to come back, that I'd made my point. "The door is not locked, Mom," I said. "It never was. You can come here any time, but I'm done asking your permission to be worth something. She told me, softer than she'd ever said it, that family closes ranks, that I'd chosen the door. I'd heard that line my whole life, and it had always landed like a sentence. This time I just smiled. "You're right," I said. "I did choose the door. I just walked through a different one than you meant." She didn't have an answer for that. She stayed for a coffee, which was more than I expected. And when she left, she touched my arm at the threshold, just for a second, and didn't try to grab anything by it. It was the most honest thing she'd done in years. If you take one thing from my story, take this. Your worth was never theirs to hand you or to take back. And sometimes the very thing they call your grave is just the ground nobody else was brave enough to dig. That's my story. One rundown lot, one sealed door, and a name that was never as clean as it looked. If this reminded you that your worth isn't anyone's to give or take it as your sign to stop asking permission for your own life. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.